The History of Yoga Part 2. Yoga and its Way West. In fact, we start right where we finished, at the very same period, the period of colonization of India. Well, the colonization itself made not much good to India. It destroyed the traditional Indian culture. It mixed it with lots of something else. It sucked Manipura, the dominant energies, out of India's egregore. But for the West, it was surely the great cultural and economic breakthrough. Because, as it is noticed, when something bad happens to the West, it usually turns to the East. Be it the tradition of crusades, when the Crusaders had found and brought back to Europe the lost traditions of Greek culture because of Christianity. Crusaders brought back not only scientific and philosophical texts of Greek culture, which were translated into Arabic language, but also the tradition of good healings and bath. The period of Europe's turn to India was similar with that times. One must say that in Europe we already had the European esoteric tradition at that time, which was Freemasonry. If we will withdraw Masonic conspiracy and conspiracy nonsense, then what actually is Freemasonry? It is an esoteric tradition of transformational type, which means that it's both hidden and its aim is personal transformation. And Masonic symbols vividly say about this. If we have an old personality symbolized as a pyramid, then there is a hammer which is needed to destroy it, then we need an area and a trowel to measure the new one, and to build the new one. So we change ourselves, we change the society, as Freemasons thought. The main service of Freemasonry to European culture was that this tradition had not only the merit of personal transformation, but also it aimed to the society's transformation. All the revolutionary ideas of European culture we owe to Freemasonry. For instance, the liberal ideas, the idea of humans' natural rights, the idea of free market, the idea of constitution itself. All these ideas were born within the Freemasonry tradition. Recently there was an esoteriology conference in St. Petersburg, and there it became evident and clear of what is the sense of esoterics to its culture and its social tradition. Esoterics generates new ideas which are beyond the current social reality. But then these ideas are accepted and consumed by the social reality. Thus it develops itself. I will illustrate this on some other examples, but for now we can stop on Masons and liberalism. Well, in fact, why this very idea of Masonic conspiracy exists? Well, it appeared in the period of 18th to 19th centuries, so it was a very conservative period, and Masons were the people who wanted to change the political regime and establish democracy or liberalism or something like this. But by the end of 18th century, Freemasonry was pretty much exhausted, and it decided to make its way to the East. The first two remarkable personalities to open the small keyholes to the culture of the East were Anquetil du Perron and Sir Charles Whitkins. Anquetil du Perron was quite an inquisitive person. While being young, he wanted to see the world, and he settled in the East Indian Company. While he gradually sailed to East India, somebody noticed that he is far beyond the usual sailor by his intelligence, and unusually he was granted the leave warrant and an honorable pension, and he was suggested to wander around India. Those Freemasons who gave him this option were an extremely good psychologist because their investment was paid off 100%. This was the first Western man to find Upanishads. Well, he didn't master Sanskrit, but he mastered Farsi, the Persian language, and he was the first to find the Avesta text. He translated both Avesta and Upanishads, and he was the first to publish them in Europe. It was the first European language, which was French. When he came back to France, he was found again, and he was given a pension as a translator, and he was settled in some small library. How had Freemasons benefited from this is unknown, but the European culture's benefit of this action was enormous. Hegel created his philosophy inspired with these Upanishads. I got acquainted with Upanishads when I was a teenager and I read Hegel. I opened Hegel, read the quotations from Upanishads, and they pierced me as a spear. And only much later I discovered that these were the quotations of Upanishads, translated once by Anquetil Duperron. Being inspired with these translations of Upanishads and Avesta, wrote his works Schopenhauer. In fact, links between European esotericism and European philosophy are everywhere, and I will get back to this topic later. So here is just a single man who made a huge work. Now these translations don't appear as good as at that times. The other person, Wilkins, had shared a very similar destiny. He was English, he had a higher social status, and he also turned to East India Company, but not as a usual sailor. So he worked in the printing house in India, and he was the first person to create the Sanskrit typography fonts. Besides, he made the first translation of Bhagavad Gita from Sanskrit to English in 1785. And already 3 years later, the Bhagavad Gita was translated to Russian in the typography of Nikolai Novikov, the only man in Russian history who was accused in Freemasonic views. In fact, he was the profound enlightener who had published everything most extraordinary, revolutionary and new in his typography. This was the translation from English, not Sanskrit, but nevertheless. So Freemasons of that period were engaged into enlightenment, and they made the new space for existence of all the ideas which came to European culture, which we must thank for. With the 19th century, there started the scientific Orientalism. One might be fascinated of how interconnected the European intellectual elite is. Sir Monier Williams, an outstanding Orientalist, he's saying, the true aristocrat must have two hobbies, Orientalism and intelligence service. Sir Monier Williams had made the best, as of today, Sanskrit-English dictionary, which is the 2 huge volumes with 100,000 words. Well, it's truly incredible. How is it at all possible to do without a computer? And at the same time, he participated in the British government's project. As you might be confused, but most of Indians don't know Sanskrit. They read their texts either in English or in Hindi. Even Mahatma Gandhi has reached Bhagavad Gita in English, in London, in this very translation. And only then he could read it in some of his native languages, probably in Hindi, because he was Vaishya by caste, so he shouldn't know Sanskrit. With these translations, British government started slightly transform classical Indian texts, which is discovered by Mark Singatal, the great scientist of yoga studies, so that some aspects of Christianity were brought into them, and the aspects of Manipura and Swatisthana, the domination and the pleasure aspects, were taken out of. Actually, Indian Manipura and Swatisthana were destroyed in some more direct ways. For example, the first thing which was prohibited in India was the India's martial arts. Kalari Prayat, the Tamil martial art, almost didn't survive, but it's evident that Hindus were a very militant nation. We see the huge text on this, the Dhanurveda and Dhanur Shastra. Moreover, it was the India's army to stop the army of Alexander the Great, so Hindus were capable of making wars. But now they aren't, and these were English who did it to them. And Swatisthana chakra was also eliminated. Possibly lots of you have seen the Indian dance, Bharatnatyam. Did you see which are the clothes of modern dancers? 18 meters of fabric cover the body all around. Well, Bharatnatyam was danced in antiquity, but it was danced almost naked. The breasts are naked, there is some small clothes on thighs, so why do we need all these clothes in India? So this is the influence of English, who tried to cut off the India's Swatisthana. For instance, if you will take the usual English translation of Kama Sutra, and then you will take the academic translation, you will see that half of text is lost in English usual translation. Only several years ago, the Kama Sutra was once more translated into English in the new complete and detailed version. I will give you examples of such reductive translations later. But in any case, this man Monier Williams had made a lot for studies of the East, and was for the interconnection of European intellectuals. As you see here, this photo of Monier Williams is made by Lewis Carroll. Another renowned figure, Max Müller, not only an outstanding Sanskritologist, but also a great Orientalist and a renowned historian of philosophy. His known quote is, "The one who knows just one religion knows no religions. The religions could be understood only with comparison with each other and comparing to their roots. To understand how much had Max Muller done, we have to come to the Indian academic store. There we'll see the huge row of books where Max Muller had translated all the Vedas, all the Samhita, all the other texts, lots of philosophical things. So it's enormous amount of work which this man had done. So he also was the one who blazed the path to understanding Indian culture. And at last, the first translation of Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The first edition of Yoga Sutra translation by James Ballantyne. In this very translation, it's vividly seen how Christianity transforms the original text. And these issues still influence those schools which are not found in the classical original texts. For instance, one of the short sutras of Yoga Sutra, Tasya Vachaka Pranavaha. Tasya means his, Ishvaras. Vachaka means name, naming. Pranavaha is Om, but Ballantyne translates, his name is glory, which is a commonplace Christianity. And there are lots of these elements in this translation. But nevertheless, Yoga Sutra became available in English.